Test. Testing. Okay, thank you, councillors. Being 6 o'clock, I'd like to declare the ordinary meeting, Blayney Shire Council for February 2021 open. Thank you all very much for your attendance. In opening this meeting, I'd like to recognise the traditional custodians of this land, the Wiradjuri people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Councillors, welcome. It's our first meeting for 2021, and just a reminder that this meeting is being live streamed, and for members of public in the chamber, you need to be reminded that you may be recorded as part of this live streaming here tonight. Apologies, I believe everybody's accounted for, Madam GM. Disclosures of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest for the business here this evening, Madam GM?
I do, through you, Mr Mayor. I have three. The first one is from yourself, Councillor Ferguson, Event Development Program. It is item number 4 on page 30. The reason for your interest is that your sister is employed by Blayney Platform Arts Hub, which is a subcommittee of the Blayney Town Association, and it is a pecuniary interest. Second declaration of conflict of interest is from Councillor Somervale. The report is the planning agreement for McPhillamy's Gold Project, which is item number 5 on page 32. The reason for the interest is that Councillor Somervale is a consultant to the law firm that represented Regis in the negotiation and drafting of the voluntary planning agreement. It is a non-pecuniary significant interest. The final declaration of conflict of interest is from Councillor Reynolds. The report title is the Rural Fire Service Contributions. It is item number 19 on page number 93. The interest is that Councillor Reynolds' company does work for the Canobola zone of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, and it is a pecuniary interest.
Thank you, Madam GM. Councillors, we do have 3 public forums this evening before we start our meeting. I'd like to invite our first speaker, which just turned up, David Price. David's going to talk about item 5 in regards to the planning agreement, McPhillamy's Gold Project. Thanks, Dub. About 5 minutes, and I'll give you a bit of notice, about a minute to go.
Hello. Is that working? Anyway. I don't know whether you all know me, but my name's David Price. I'm fourth generation here in the Blayney community, and been paying my rates all my life. On to history, just to start with. Back in the day when the abattoirs was going, there was from time to time spills into the river. Of course, no one wanted to know about this because it is such a large employer. Carcoar Dam was having some big outbreaks of blue-green algae. I don't know whether you all remember that, but it was pretty substantial. It's very toxic to humans and livestock. People were unable to swim, and stock had to be removed from drinking there. It was believed that it could have been the mix of these spills from the abattoirs combined with the sewage water from our township. Moving on, the abattoirs closed, and Carcoar Dam is now the major draw card of advertisement to this area, used by new council everywhere. Every advertisement you see, Carcoar Dam. A great draw card, beautiful spot. Now I'm sure either you councillors, or some of your family members have used this magnificent dam for the recreation at some time. It's a beautiful spot. To my evidence, since the abattoirs is closed, the dam has not had any outbreaks. Looking at the sewage still flowing into the river and mixing with the river water seems to be okay. Take the river water away, once Regis dam it, we will have to have a more concentrated sewage outflow. Are you, the council, willing to see what happens? I say yes, because looking at your VA agreement put forward to Regis, it looks as if you're only working on Regis's side, not the community and you are representatives for. This negotiation looks good for a single individual, not for the whole shire and township of these people. It looks to me for one person. To me, as an outsider, it looks as if the council have a dusting of gold dust on their own jackets. Getting back to the abattoirs, it has long been closed and the township has survived. It still sits there on top of the creek, looking beautiful. Much the same as Regis Tarling Dam will be, with no water coming downstream unless it's contaminated. For the council to put forward such a poor negotiation shows absolutely no regard for the community and the environment that this project is going to affect. My wife, she stood up here in November meeting and looked for some sort of support, but nothing. Not even a phone call. Either with some sort of agreement or even disagreement. There could have been something. This is what the problem is. We're the community crying out and it looks as if no one wants to know us. It just shows how weak every one of you are. It's disgraceful. Don't laugh at me. You can laugh as much as you like, because I know it's a laughable joke of what I'm standing up here to say, because we're here trying to get something done and you're just laughing at it because you know it's all done. Because you didn't listen. You're not listening. The way this VPA has been endorsed leads me to believe that the council has not listened to any community concerns on this. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dub. Councillors, we now have a second speaker on the same item, item 5, plan agreement with Philome's Gold Project. I'd like to invite Daniel Sutton up to the microphone. Same thing, you have about 5 minutes approximately, and I'll let you know in about a minute to go. Thank you.
I'd just like to address, I was going to talk about the EPA, but after seeing that it's already been endorsed, I've actually come to 5 minutes of discussion as a resident of Walkham Road, and just want to raise some pertinent items that I'm going through as a resident in Kings Plains. So I'm speaking as a resident of Walkham Road in Kings Plains in relation to Regis Resources claiming on several occasions that they are proactively working with residents on implementing negotiated agreements. The agreements were only delivered to residents in December, and not one of them has been signed. Regis's condition on the timing of these agreements is that they must be signed before the project is approved, if it is. The decision on the proposal likely within the next 5 months, Regis is yet to deliver almost half of these to the residents. This puts considerable time pressure on the residents when they eventually get the agreements to actually sign them. As a neighbouring resident, I'd like to shed some insight into what my experience has shown is misguided assumption and perception of what the council and the public believe the residents are getting out of this proposal. I'm only talking tonight after seeking considerable legal advice at my own expense to ensure I will not cause any issues for my own agreement or anything for me down the track. Regis are offering to supply and install air conditioning in properties that have historically never used or needed it. All of us enjoy the fresh air of the area and leave our windows open. They're not offering to cover the cost of the operating of the air conditioning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as they themselves recommend to prevent any noise intrusion. The offer to acquire the properties within 5 years of approval is essentially conditional on the resident having an alternative property in the area ready to be acquired when they want to sell at the same time. These just don't exist. Additionally, what if outside of this timeline the resident wants to sell for whatever reason on the open market? Any potential buyers will immediately be greeted by dump trucks, blasting, dust, and heavy noise intrusions. There is no reasonable person that will purchase these properties for market value, and yet there will be no recourse for the resident to request Regis to acquire their property. These agreements also come with several conditions that lead to question Regis's motives. Some of the more interesting clauses in these agreements are a clause that specifically prevents us from ever speaking about the agreements we have or the compensation we have agreed to. If Regis are operating in a fair and equitable manner, then why are we forced to secrecy in our dealings with them? There's a condition that prevents a resident from making a direct or indirect complaint about the impacts of the project, which again makes you wonder if their project is going to have such little impact as they claim, why are we being bound to gag clauses? Regis continues to claim they are within noise limits, but they don't provide context of this. Their modelling suggests they are within the state policy noise limits, which allows up to 5 decibels of noise louder than a standard noise level. Now, this standard noise level is already louder than the Kings Plains current noise levels. Regis's modelling shows that at our residence, during the night, noise will be 11 decibels louder than what it currently is. That's every minute of every night for 11 years. These numbers also assume that every one of their considerable mitigation measures are fully functioning 100% of the time. Another condition states that the agreement applies to any and all modifications to the project, meaning there is no avenue to seek further mitigation if the mine expands. They've only provided an allowance of $1,800 to cover residents' legal fees in dealing with these agreements. I assure you this is insufficient to cover reasonable legal fees for a resident to have a solicitor or consultant properly deal with these agreements. For a company promoting their donations to local charities, you'd think they could put some real money towards ensuring their direct neighbours fully understand these contracts and the impacts on them. Every Kings Plains resident has had to put parts of their lives on hold, whilst Regis has donated to Blayney charities and Orange events and sold themselves as good corporate citizens. People of Kings Plains have received nothing. The council has done nothing to support them. Some residents have sacrificed significant parts of their lives, such as being forced to delay retirement plans due to being unable to sell their properties, delay family plans, including having their own children, and delay study or career progression. Someone who has spent thousands of hours trawling through reports, conducting and attending meetings and presentations, and consoling those in similar situations, these agreements represent a spit in the face from a company who couldn't care less about us. They are not fair, they are not reasonable, and they continue to undermine and deteriorate the lives of your local residents. What I have mentioned here tonight are just some of the items that Regis has attempted to slip into what they're claiming as reasonable agreements. I'm just one example of what over 35 individual residents in your shire are going through on a daily basis. Regis is not part of the community. They are not genuinely working with their neighbours. They are not offering fair compensation for the impacts that will be felt by their nearby residents. I again implore the councillors to properly consider if the prospect of, at best, 20 new local residents, as stated by Regis in their social impact assessment report at table 7 on page 27, and I encourage you to look at it properly. 20 new residents over 11 years. That's all we would get. Does that outweigh the existing and potential exodus of current residents and the exorbitant negative impacts to existing businesses, surface water, groundwater, endangered trees and bushland, endangered animals, and the remnants of a neglected acidic pit of which our local area will bear the cost? I believe the council need to seriously consider if they are acting in the best interest of the community that already exists when the IPC hearing occurs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Councillors, we do have another last public forum. I'd like to invite Heather Davidson to the microphone. Thanks, Heather. Same thing, about 5 minutes, and I'll let you know when you're close. Thank you.
As a landholder of the western side of Blayney, I would like to propose that the whole of my property, including the additional portion of lot 2DP 811499, be included in the structural plan for future residential or rural residential development, not only the part that you've included in the draft structure plan map. This additional portion of the land could be earmarked for development into rural residential lots greater than 2,000 square metres. Demand for rural residential small acreage lots is likely to increase beyond the draft settlement strategy projections. The impact of COVID has recently manifested as a trend for people moving to regional areas. There has been reports in the media for increased demand for housing and increasing rural property sales in regional areas. These rural residential small lots would not unduly generate additional demand on water and sewerage infrastructure, as the services will be dealt with within the lot themselves. Given the anticipated significant infrastructure expenditure for the land and the adjacent to lots, including some additional residential blocks, would assist with making the project more economic for the developers. This additional portion of the land is not significantly of higher elevation than the lots already included, and it's less steep than the portion of ground behind my block. If the visual impact of rural residential development on the land could be mitigated by stipulating in 88B instrument that the landscaping standard and agricultural styles be adhered to in those lots. There is the land present with slope constraint on the southeastern portion of the former copper mine. Subdivision layout could be advised that allows for significant lot size to be accommodate building envelopes on appropriate locations. The former copper mine is scheduled for rehabilitation and could be integrated into the development as passive recreational space. Achieving a sensible master plan and urban planning outcomes will be assisted by having a larger overall site within one single ownership. If council does not wish to include the other portion of my land in the rezoning, could they zone it appropriately so that I could have a building entitlement and could move on to that block if the rest of my land is developed into residential sites? I do not wish to leave the area and I'd like to retire here. If council could rezone the remaining of the portion of my land that is not included in the settlement strategy and rezone into housing lots, be assigned a zoning that would allow for building entitlement. Otherwise, this land will be left as a very expensive horse paddock. with no value, and I would be unable to live there. Any questions?
That's great. Thank you, Heather. Very thorough presentation. And obviously we'll be discussing that later on in the meeting. Okay, thank you, councillors. That concludes our public forum. I'd now like to draw your attention to item 1, page 5, which are the minutes of the previous council meeting held on the 21st of December 2020. Recommendation there to have a mover. This is a true record. Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, any matters arising from those minutes? If not, now move through to item 2, page 15. Council resolution report. Council's recommendation there. Its report. I have a mover for this recommendation. Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Probably to Director of Infrastructure. The flood plan for February. I'm not quite sure whether, I think there's supposed to be a map or something that it says it was ready for February. Is that delayed, or have I misread that report on... and there is some mention with regard to Frog Hollow in your later report, but I'm just wondering whether there is supposed to be something else, or is that delayed to a later date?
Mr. Director.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just chasing up. Can you give me the date of that report, please, Councillor? That resolution, the meeting date?
There are many attachments, so apologies.
Sorry, is it in the list?
It is very early in the list.
In the business paper.
In the attachments, I think it was.
Mr. Mayor, I actually refer that to the Director of Planning and Environmental Services.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Councillor Reynolds, is it page 15 of the business paper?
Roughly the first item in the attachments.
Could you please repeat the question?
It says that there was supposed to be a map presented in February of the flood strategy. I'm just wondering, is there supposed to be a map, or is it delayed to a later date?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, so this is a planning proposal which has been ongoing to update the Blayney Township flood study on the back of the 2016 flood study. Report provided to the February meeting is this meeting. There's actually a resolution 0.6 on the settlement strategy which seeks to withdraw that planning proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other Councillor Somerville?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question in relation to the MOU with the Barry Boar Committee. 4.5 months since we approved the MOU, and I thought they were all good to go, but I see that's still in progress. Sends a little message to me that there's a hiccup somewhere along the line. Can we have either now or later have a report on how that's going?
GM,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll provide an update. I understand they were waiting for confirmation from their insurance of the indemnity clause. It's Christmas and New Year. We'll follow it up again and provide an update.
Thank you, Madam GM. Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Declared carried. Move now to item 3, page 26, Risk, Work, Health and Safety Quarterly Report. Of a mover, this report been noted. Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somerville has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Item 4, page 30, I've declared a pecuniary interest, and I'd like to ask the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ewan, to take the chair.
Thank you, fellow councillors. Item 4 on the agenda this evening is the Tourism Event Development Program. Recommendation there. Is someone like to move in regard to that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Have I a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Scott. Fellows, is there any questions or comments in regard to this recommendation for the Tourism Development Program? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Fully endorse the support for the Development Fund. A question related, I suppose, and probably to the General Manager with relation to the platform and the refurbishment, etc. Is there any indication when it will be officially finished and then formally opened?
You, Madam. Again.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the first stage of it's actually stage 3 of the refurbishment, which will ensure that the gallery is fitted out for the track lighting and the hanging system will be finished by the end of March, ready for the Textures of One exhibition. The interpretation and heritage displays will be completed by the early June.
Thank you.
Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The $500, that was a request from the committee, was it? It seems a very modest amount for the inaugural event at the platform, a sort of flagship event that deserves a lot of good promotion. And I see in the late item report dealing with some other grants for tourism development, the amounts there are $1,000 for each event. The $500 looks a bit on the light side, but if that's all I asked for, then I guess that's where it starts and finishes.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think in the past we've supported the Textures of One with donation of kind. Obviously, the event's been held here in our community centre, and we've given donation either through no charge for the centre and the like, and also I think in the past, and I stand to be corrected, that we have given a donation to them over and above donation in kind. Would that be correct, Madam GM?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we have our acquisitive prize, which stands, which is the $1,000.
That's right.
This is all that is requested. They did receive, the Platform Arts Hub received from some funding for an annual program, and this is just to complement the marketing and the promotion of what will be the inaugural exhibition at the Blayney train station.
Okay, a wonderful event, fellows. As you well know, it started off several years ago now, and it's been wonderful for Blayney Shire and surrounding districts, and further afield than that into Victoria and even into America, with entries from those areas in the past. A great way for Blayney to be able to show the culture of our region, and a wonderful program, and we're indebted obviously to the volunteers that run the Textures of One. And as you said, Councillor Summer, it is a very modest amount considering the support that the event does get from our Shire and the region. Councillor Denton, you had a question, I believe. No? Good. Any other questions or comments, Councillor Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just to give a little bit of clarity too, back to Councillor Somerville, in a discussion, in a meeting I was attended about a week ago with the Blayney Town Association, they were looking at potential financial assistance grants for fitting out the train station. So your committee may receive an application that way. And also they did want to acknowledge Loretta and her family, given that she passed away there about a year ago now, as well as part of this event to take place. So, and the other positive is that the Textures of One committee has a lot of new members of the committee. It's been revitalised, and that's fantastic to hear that there's a new group coming through and supporting Textures of One. So fully commend this support of the $500.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments, fellows? No other questions or comments. I put the resolution. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Thank you. Carried.
Okay, thank you, councillors. I now move through to item 5, page 32, Planning Agreement McPhillamys Gold Project. But the minutes show that Councillor Somerville has left the chamber as he has declared a conflict of interest. Council, we have a recommendation there. We have a mover for this recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? Obviously, this item was the subject of 2 of our public forums earlier this evening. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do thank our speakers who have come along tonight to talk about the voluntary planning agreement that Council has put out in public display. We received, as the Mayor has indicated, a number of responses. I have read them all personally and commend them, each individual person that has put in a submission with regard to their concerns. Now, I would like to highlight, and I think the second speaker did actually highlight, that the Independent Planning Commission is probably the where most of the comments need to be actually outlined. When that commission meets, and hopefully they're going to meet face to face here in Blayney, the community can have their say about their concerns about the project. With regard to the voluntary planning agreement, that is an agreement just to hopefully benefit the community. Much of what was written in those reports doesn't act on council, or council has no say over those matters. What does matter, though, is that this council gets the best outcome that we can within the guidelines for our community. And I actually congratulate the General Manager and staff and councillors for coming up with an agreement that hopefully will provide benefit for the community, both up front and also over the 14 or 15 years post of the current mine development. There is also a clause there if the mine is expanded, or if there is extra capital works, that the VPA will be expanded as well, which is not in normal or a lot of previous VPAs. So I encourage the community to express their concerns, whether it is with the river and potential pollution, or low flows, or the environmental impact, or with the neighbours, to try and get an outcome through the Independent Planning Commission, because this council, again, has no direct impact. We can put in a submission to there, and the council can present. So I think that's important to distinguish, that the council's not actually making the decision on this mine. It's up to, firstly, the government, so the DPI, to make a recommendation, and then the Independent Planning Commission to actually make a decision or a final determination on whether the project will go ahead and what conditions are placed on the project if it does go ahead. We would be irresponsible if we didn't develop a voluntary planning agreement as a council to provide something to the community if this project does go ahead. If we didn't have anything, as in the community would actually not benefit at all. So for a start, I think that's important to highlight, but I do encourage the community, again, to put in submissions when the opportunity arises, to try and get the best outcome for the community. I do also hear that the community is hurting. I have tried personally to get some counselling assistance. I'm unsure where it currently is up to, but hopefully there is some support for community members. With regard to the, I do support that if the mine does go ahead and the funds do flow, that at least one resident from the Kings Plains area should be involved, but it's up to the council of the day, once and if this mine is agreed to, whether that person does come on that committee to look at the allocation of funds. But again, with that committee, the same as with the CADIA committee, or the funds, the voluntary planning agreement funds, it's ultimately the council that makes the decision. It has to ratify the decision. So again, recommendations can be put up, but I do again encourage that hopefully someone from the Kings Plains community can be involved once and if this mine is progressed. So I do support the voluntary planning agreement because I think it's in the best interests of the entire community that we have one, as opposed to not negotiating a voluntary planning agreement and potentially leaving our community exposed to not receiving some financial assistance. But I would hope whatever we do use, if this mine does go ahead, as in the projects, are long lasting, so the community actually has some positive outcomes in the medium and long term, not just while the mine is here, in assets and community assets, rather than just, I know the wrong word is wasting, but using the money on very short-term projects that won't provide any long-term outcomes for our community. So again, I fully support the VPA and what the council is voting for tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Councillor Newstead.
First off, I'd just like to apologise to David for chuckling, but I find it difficult that people will accuse the council of lining their own pockets. We're not the deciding, whatever, you know, the consent developer, whatever, you know what I'm talking about. But I've stated all along that I do have concerns for the residents of Kings Plains and the river. And yes, I have used the dam on many occasions. Do I want to see it contaminated? No. Do I know that it will? None of us do until, you know, the mine is given the go-ahead. Like Councillor Reynolds, VPA is something that we've got to do. Mine is approved or not approved. But it doesn't mean that we go along with the mine. Maybe I'm right against it. But as a councillor, it's also difficult for me when I've got people coming up to me saying, when's the mine going to be approved? No, there's fors and against. So I just don't like being accused of lining my own pocket, because that's not the case for the Blayney Council or any of the other councillors. It's a bloody hard decision that's going to be made. We're not the ones making the decision. That'll be up to the IPC. But I think this, I know people say that they don't think that this VPA is enough. From my understanding, it doesn't even have to be done. It's voluntary. And to compare it to Cadia Mine, when this isn't going to be half the size of that mine, it's a bit hard, you know, I find that a bit strange as well. Now, I'll just repeat, I do have concerns for the people of Kings Plains. I really do. And I do have concerns about the river. But we've got somebody in the audience here. Did you just say bullshit then? Okay. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Sorry, David, but...
Thank you. Thank you, councillor. Thank you, Dub. Thank you, Councillor Newstead. You finished?
I'm not laughing at them. I'm just laughing at the fact that they keep accusing Blayney Shire Council of being corrupt. That's how I feel. And when in the end, it won't be us who gives the go-ahead for the mine. Anyway, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Newstead. I just remind that we are considering the VPA agreement, and I realise it's part of a bigger issue that's been dealing with by the community. Tonight, we're considering the VPA as put before us. Councillors, any other questions or comments on this item? Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'd just like to support what Councillor Rance and Councillor Newstead have said in points, but as particularly in what Councillor Reynolds said, the agreement is a part of the total process that we as a council have decided at this point in time that it is as a fair agreement should this mine happen, and we need to protect our community and the region's gold should the mine happen, need to support our community through that voluntary. Otherwise, we would suffer very badly in the wider community. And I too understand there's grave concerns, particularly with the Belabula River downstream from the mine site. The voluntary planning agreement, they're there to make sure that we don't have any issues, and we will hope they put on some fairly tough conditions of consent that will stop any of those issues that that none of us really at this point in time know that may or may not happen. I hope it is over conditioned to the point that there will never be any issues, because that's what you and I need. We don't need to be dealing with issues after the event, nor does the mine. It's a tough one. The planning agreement will be decided by the departments of New South Wales, different departments, and they've done and continue to do very, very thorough investigations and ask the questions, I believe, at this point in time. So we rely on their knowledge and expertise to give you and I the right answers. And I guess there are as many people who don't live on the doorstep of the proposed mine that don't have the concerns that you people here tonight have. And I don't condone your concerns. I believe they're very valid, and we do need answers. The more thorough the process is at the moment, and it is a process, the more thorough the process is, the better outcome we'll have should the mine be granted permission. Yes, it's a tough one, and I know no one likes change, and I'm quite very much the same as you in regard to change. Sometimes, in hindsight, it turns out to be much better than any of us expected, and we would hope to think, should this development happen, that it will be that way, because we do not need to be dealing with detrimental issues from Regent's Gold in the future. We know, and they've openly said, that there will be noise and dust, and we hope in that those two conditions are conditioned so that there is none to minimal. And yes, we just can't say wait and see, I guess, so, because that's no good. We need to know before anything happens that it is going to be right for you and I and everyone, regardless of where we live in the Shire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Just quickly like to confirm a couple of things in regards to the VPA particularly, which is what we're discussing tonight. It is, as been mentioned, it is part of the process. It is not an endorsement of the mine by Blayney Shire Council. It is something that the mine has to do as part of the assessment process. 1% capex, being $1 million upfront and $212,000 per year, is going towards the community. It's nothing to do with reinstatement of the mine or anything that happens operationally. That's a totally separate issue. This is just to recognise there will be an impact on the community, and this money will go towards supporting the community during that impact. 1%, we would all like more money. We would all like more money. The reality is the 1% agreement, and this is been supported by the Association of Mining and Energy Related Councils, and indeed the department, is a very good VPA from a numbers point of view. It's the convention, it's a fair and reasonable amount. It's a standard right across the mining industry, right across New South Wales. The number is a fair and reasonable number. Again, it will depend on the Independent Planning Commission to endorse or not the process, including this VPA. I think it has been a good process. Again, if and when this money is available for the community, Council will engage the community on how it's best spent, if and when it is to happen. But this VPA is not an endorsement of the mine. It's a part of the process. It is a good VPA from a dollar point of view, as far as 1% of capex. Right across New South Wales is a good standard VPA. And we know there are a heap of issues going forward. Unfortunately, the process is dragged out, and I believe it's going to continue to drag out, is my understanding. And unfortunately, that is the case. The process will run, but we'll certainly look forward to the Independent Planning Commission coming to Blayney when the report is handed to them. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this issue? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? I declare it carried, and I declare it unanimous because I will call for a division. Thank you. Declare the motion carried. Councillors, now move through to page 38, item 6, report of council investments as at the 31st of December, recommendations 1 and 2. We'll invite Councillor Somervale to come back into the chamber. I believe Councillor Kingham has moved both recommendations. Councillor, I have a seconder for these recommendations. Councillors, questions or comments regards to this report? No questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Page 43, item 7, report of council investments as at the 31st of January 2021. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations?
I move with an
Reynolds
amendment,
has
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Reynolds, has moved the recommendations with an amendment.
Just an amendment to the table. That's the register investments. The total investments in cash stated here is 20,243,179. In the report above, it's actually stated as 19,222,731. I think it's been cut and pasted from the previous month. So just to correct that figure there as total investments. And then I'm happy to move the report.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I think Director will just make note of that. Thank you. Do we have a seconder for these recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Somervale. Any other questions or comments, councillors? If not, nearly missed you there, Councillor. Councillor Somervale, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note Councillor Reynolds' comments, but all I wanted to say was to compliment Council on, in our register investments, disclosing the method by which we choose which organisation we'll invest our money with, because as I've said before in this forum, I'm very much in favour of direct investments. I'm a bit suspicious of investing on a recommendation of some intermediary who stands not to charge us anything, but to get some sort of remuneration from the bank that they're recommending we invest with. So I'm very pleased to see that, and it's also interesting to see that the investments which have been placed through the intermediaries tend to be, with the exception of Macquarie Bank, tend to be those that are the most lowly rated. Which does suggest to me that the way more lowly rated institutions get funding from councils is by getting intermediaries to do the work for them. So I'm very pleased that that we're now showing how we secure the investments.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somervale. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to page 48, item 8, the quarterly budget review statement, December 2020. There's 2 recommendations there. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to QBRS? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Page 55 of the business paper, which is page 5 of the report. I just have a query with regard to employee expenses. And looking that they've come in at 3.6 million for the first 6 months of the financial year, or the equivalent of 7.2 million, yet we've only budgeted $6.5 million. So it technically leaves us with less than $3 million for the second half of the financial year to cover employee expenses. Just wondering if there's a reason why our employee expenses were so high in the first half of the financial year, or are we going to have to look at a QBRS adjustment in the third quarter to cover what appears to be a higher wage bill than what was projected or expected for half a year?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Madam GM.
Through you, Mr Mayor, we'll take that on notice, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? It carried. Okay, councillors, now draw your attention to page 73, item 9, the 6-month delivery plan review, December 2020. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Somervale would like to move that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to 6-month delivery plan review? You could report. If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Item 10, page 75, Information Technology Quarterly Report. Recommendation there that this report be received. Thank you. Councillor Denton has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Any questions or comments, councillors, in regards to the Information Technology Report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Very concerning the amount of attempts to hack the organisation from outside over that 3-month period, nearly 20,000 attempts, as well as the internal network tried to penetrate the internal network, over 3,000 attempts. So congratulations to our IT staff and anyone else involved to try and by the looks of it, we've had no actual success in penetrating our firewall or our internal network. So hopefully we can continue, and we've built a fairly strong system around, but again, nothing's totally penetrable, so I assume staff are constantly working on being in front of threats.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? We have a mover, we have a seconder. No other questions. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through the page 77, item 11. I would ask you to refer to the updated report. I do apologise for the lateness of it, but it is updated. We have Councillor Kingham would like to move the updated report, item 11. We have a seconder for this report. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Questions, comments? Councillor Kingham.
I have to say, I'm very pleased that the local showground's able to legally use the land that they for a long period of time. They've been using for a long time, and there's also on land out there, so unfortunately that's going to be someone else. I know that was a good.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to the updated report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think the Councillor Kingham is jumping the gun. We haven't quite decided on the donation or sale yet. That's another item. But just reinforcing though what Councillor Kingham did say, a good outcome to try and recover some of the unpaid rates, and hopefully in a moment we'll resolve another issue with the Carcoar Showground. So yeah, hopefully a win-win. The council has received some revenue back, though it is, in looking at the report or the original report, the cost, and this new report, the cost of selling is $26,000. It's quite an expensive exercise to sell, and when some of the blocks are worth potentially less than that or have been passed in, it's a difficult decision, but we should be trying to recover at least some costs. The only question I do have though is, do we actually look at the cost of sale to see whether we can actually get more back, or are we legally obliged to put it on the market even if it's going to cost us more than potentially we might get back for some of these smaller blocks that people aren't paying rates on? Probably a question to the General Manager or Director of Corporate Services.
Through you, Mr Mayor. We choose to sell the blocks rather than leave them as unknown owners and untraceable, because that adds to the administrative burden to council in having to write off rates on an annual basis. So yeah, our preference is that we get a ratepayer for land rather than have no one.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, move now through to item 12, page 80, the adoption of information security policy. Recommendation there, this policy be adopted. Do I have a mover? Councillor Denton, thank you, was moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this policy? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note in it with regard to the authorisation process and the sort of the double authorisation or protecting our authorisation, something I have observed firsthand in an experience within this shire, but nothing to do with the council, very recently with authorisation or non-authorisation. So it's good that we are actually looking at that process to make sure that we have a watertight authorisation process when it comes to expenditure, because that is a potential area of fraud in any organisation, and it's important that we have at least a double or even a triple authorisation process so that you can minimise, I can never say you will eliminate the potential of fraud, but to absolutely minimise it. So I commend that as part of this report in reading the policy that we have put up here to make sure that it is as watertight as we possibly can make it, while still operational or practical, I think is the important term. Otherwise, if you make it too secure, then it's impractical to actually pay bills or to fund projects. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds, for those comments. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 13, page 81, Disability Inclusion Action Plan, 17 to 21 status report. Recommendations there, Councillors 1 and 2. Councillor Denton has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this plan? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment, and I do make it every time the plan comes up, with regard to parking. Hopefully in the next 6 months or so that we can start to progress the parking side a little bit further. We have made some new car parks, for example, at Centrepoint, which are fully accessible, but there are some other car parks that are signposted as accessible, for example, in Millthorpe, in front of the school, that do not meet the standards. So hopefully we can develop it, and I'll probably continue to bring it up every time that this report comes up. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments? I'd just like to make note that it's excellent that we can do this plan with Orange and combined councils. I think that obviously should have a regional approach to a lot of things, and certainly disability inclusion should be one of those. Okay, councillors, no other questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 14, page 83, change of tenure, Crown Land Cemeteries. Important issue. Recommendation there, councillor, for this recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way, and Councillor Denton has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments? It seems fair and reasonable. Councillor Kingham.
Cemeteries?
Definitely not.
Getting comments regularly. Councils. I've not heard a whisper or anything official. We're on the card. This is just vegetation. So if we council cemetery, or in fact land.
Yes, Councillor Kingham, I'm disappointed that's ridiculous. Really, certainly not on. This is really about having more control through council to change it to community land, natural areas, so we can actually manage the cemeteries better which I think all the community are expecting, that we do manage our cemeteries a lot better. Definitely not selling them. Put that on the record right now. Councillors, any other questions? Item, if not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to item 15, page 85, compliance and reporting activities. Recommendation there. It gets noted and received. Thank you. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way, I believe. Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item? Pretty straightforward. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Item 16, page 87, lease of industrial land for adjustment purposes. Recommendation there, councillors. Will those leases be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Denton. Talking too much. I am. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any questions or comments in regards to these items? Councillor Kingham.
There, on page 88, the council said previous financial year leased land.
Sorry, Councillor, we're just getting the technology working a little bit better for you there. So the question again was? Spending money?
Sorry. On page 88, it says that the council in the previous financial year incurred expenditure of $28,144 on these leased lands connected with the sale yards. I'd like to know, how did we manage to incur that much cost?
Councillor Kingham, Mr. Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, I can provide councillors a further report if you so desire under separate cover, but it largely covers rates, water charges, and other related expenses.
So we do charge ourselves rates on that land.
So we're the owners of the land, but the rates are charged against this land.
That's correct. It's rateable land.
Yep, so it's a cost. Certainly, I'm sure the Director will put some detail together to your question anyway, around the 28,000. Mentions here as far as insurance, land rates, water charges. Happy with that, Councillor Kingham? More information as needed? Thank you. Any other question? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With relation to water charges, normally when you lease something, you have to pay for the water charges. So there is the potential that people just leave the tap on. I'm just wondering, in this report, and I'll wait for the report to come back, express my concerns that there's no incentive for people to use less water. And is that one of our biggest costs in this 28,000? So, but the Director hopefully can come back and provide an answer. And that would be the only concern I would have here with the new leasing charges, that, yeah, again, we may not even be covering the water charges. I don't know. So I wait for the report to come back.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, we have a mover, we have a seconder. Any other questions or comments relation to this item? Councillor Somerville.
Yeah, just a bit curious about the late submission that was excluded. So was that for one of the lots that was not allocated, or was that one of the lots that someone else bid for and is recommended here?
Mr. Director.
Through Mr. Mayor, that late offer was for lot 10, and the request was merely requested for undertaking of some infrastructure works to counteract flooding, stormwater, flooding from neighbouring block. So we've made an arrangement. Well, I've undertaken to that party that council will make access available to them, because they really don't require the access to the property for 4 years. So it was really, in hindsight, they should have just approached council rather than put an offer to control the land for 4 years.
Complicated. Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Page 89, item 17, amendment to investment policy. Recommendation there, councillors, this policy be amended. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Somervale has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, I think, got in first. Any questions or comments, Councillor Somervale?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just make one comment. I'm glad to see this amended policy has been brought forward in response to some comments I've made over a long period of time. I'm very happy to move this, but in moving this, I'd like to foreshadow, and maybe this will be in the form of a notice of motion for next month's meeting. I'd like to foreshadow that I'll be moving that council declare that AMP Bank be a prohibited investment for the purposes of clause 1.8 of the investment policy. I don't expect councillors to simply agree with what I'm suggesting from the floor of the meeting. I'll do a notice of motion and I'll explain why I'd like council to support that. I think councillors have had a bit of a forewarning that this was coming, and since I spoke about this last time, a American private equity firm who was interested in AMP, including AMP Bank, has done their due diligence, I think thrown their arms up in horror and have walked away from it. So I think the problems that unfortunately are plaguing, including AMP Bank, will be going on for some time yet. So anyway, I will move that at the next meeting.
Councillor Somervale, thank you for foreshadowing that as well for your fellow councillors. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Carried. Councillors, page 91, item 18, land passed in its sale of land for unpaid rates. Recommendations there 1 and 2. I have a mover for this, Councillor. I know Councillor Kingham would like to move this one, and I'll ask Councillor Reynolds if he's happy to second it. So we have a mover and a seconder. Any questions or comments that hasn't been covered? Councillor Reynolds.
As Councillor Kingham wants to go first, as he's foreshadowed. Would you like to?
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say, that the showground has been levelling this ground. It has thought it was its own ground previously. I do have one question to the probably the General Manager, just to double check that there has been no interest since the auction in this block. Zero interest, which is a positive that I think we're going to get the community is going to receive an asset that's going to enhance the showground. And as Councillor Kingham foreshadowed, there is another land issue that's the showground and the Crown is currently working on. So hopefully once that's worked through, we'll have a fantastic facility, particularly with all the government assistance that's going in for the sheep yards, the shearing shed, the toilet, or the septic, and other facilities at the ground, the spectator pavilion. So fully support the sale for $1 of the Carcoar Showground to the Crown Reserve. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. It certainly is a very good outcome, I believe. Questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, page 93, item 19, Rural Fire Service contributions. Very important issue that's raising its head. Councillor Reynolds has declared interest and is leaving the chamber. There's a recommendation there, councillors. We need to do some serious lobbying in regards to this item. Councillor Ewan has moved that way, and thank you. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Any questions or comments regards to this item? Unless
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is very concerning because the increased contribution is almost under the question, one could say. I guess I think there's a lot of issues with the RFS in regard to the way the funding is determined for each individual council. And also have the concerns that we've always, with the RFS, particularly in the Canobolas zone, and Blayney Shire, that unfortunately the budget doesn't always or has never lined up with the allocation. So the recommendation here that we approach our minister in regard to this, I would suggest is a great way to go, because it's almost unaffordable, particularly for small councils in our area or right throughout New South Wales. I would suggest that maybe as a council we should write to Cabon, Cowra and Orange to the minister, because they too sit in a situation very much like us. And then, of course, we have the the issue of the insurance to deal with, and I understand they're trying to come up with a fair wage that everyone pays in insurance. In the past, there was always the joke made, well, if you're insured, we'll fight the fire, and when it goes into the neighbours, he's not insured, we won't do that. Well, that doesn't happen, as we well know. We won't fight the fire on the other side of the fence. We know that doesn't happen, but I believe that everyone should pay their way, and should that happen under a system that is fair and equitable to all concerned, that would be an ultimate outcome. But in regard to our funding contribution, I'll be shy to RFS, that certainly needs to be escalated, as I said, to the minister and get some answers. So I fully support the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ewan. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Councillor Somerville?
Just a thought, Mr. Mayor. This is an extraordinarily large impost on council, and as the report says, far exceeds the rate peg. If we don't get a rebate next year, then pretty well every dollar of our permitted increase in rates income will go probably not even sufficiently towards the RFS contribution, which is a bizarre outcome. My thought is that maybe one angle, and this may be misguided, but maybe one angle is to ensure that when IPART do their calculations of the rate peg, that they include in the basket of expenses that councils have to bear this particular expense. Because I know IPART's got a very elaborate formula for trying to work out what the rate peg ought to be based on construction costs and employee wages and all that sort of thing. But this is such a significant amount that it would be certainly unfair if this wasn't included in the calculation of the rate peg.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Somerville. It is all about who's going to pay for it. So the important thing here, there's a couple of perfect storms. One is the support that local government and the state government had for the increase in the insurance levy for firefighters particularly that may contract a type of cancer during firefighting. And the second is the recommendations that have come out of the recent RFS, the fire service report, saying needs to be more money to the RFS. So again, I don't think anyone's surprised at that after the horrific bushfires of last summer. The report has come back saying we need more money, need more investment. The issue local government has is that we have not had the opportunity to discuss with state government how that money is raised. As you all know, proposed under the FEASL that it would go back onto rates as opposed to insurance policies. That's off the table again at the moment. We really do need to lobby. Now, the whole sector is obviously affected by this, so there'll be some serious undertakings as there'll be an issue at Country Mayors, Local Government New South Wales. We'll certainly take it up again as advocacy. All we're asking is that as a state government, if we are to raise this money from our community, that we need a proper, fair and equitable mechanism to do that, whether it's through the rate pecking mechanism, whether it's a levy, or whether it goes back onto land rates. All these things need to be discussed instead of just handing these invoices to expectation pay it in our normal operational expenditure. Big issue, and it's just an issue that I wish the state government would engage local government with in a lot better way. No other questions or comments, councillors? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. Page 96, item 20, Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting minutes held 18th November. Recommendations there 1 to 5. Council, do we have a mover for these? Well, sorry, we'll ask Councillor Reynolds to come back into the chamber. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. We're now on page 96, item 20, Audit Risk and Improvement Committee meeting minutes. Recommendations there 1 to 5. Do I have a move for these recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Somervale. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any questions or comments? Councillor Somervale.
Just one comment, Mr Mayor, just draw councillors' attention. I think Councillor Reynolds mentioned this earlier, the importance of being on top of our exposure to fraud. There's a lot of people out there trying to defraud every organisation they can find with a bit of susceptibility. Just draw your attention to the fact that the Audit Committee went through a tender process for firms to conduct a fraud risk health assessment. National Audit Group was chosen to conduct that audit, and all councillors would have received a questionnaire from National Audit Group asking councillors to respond so they can get some idea of the awareness of the governing body of council of our exposure to the risk of fraud. I hope all councillors, like I have responded to that questionnaire.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somervale. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll just endorse and back up what Councillor Somervale has said. It's good we've appointed this organisation, and hopefully moving forward they'll do some analysis and with some recommendations that further rigour to our processes. So thank you, Mr Mayor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to page 99, item 21, Director Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. Recommendation there, report be received and noted. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somervale has seconded. Councillors, any questions? I know Councillor Reynolds would have a question for sure. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, I'd just like to congratulate the Director, but also the staff, as in doing a huge amount of work, a lot of projects either happening or about to happen in the next 6 months. Carcoar Street, one of the major ones in this report. Fantastic, the work that we're doing. We've hit a few hurdles and hopefully we're overcoming those challenges. And some of them have been a legacy challenge, or one of them with some water pipes that just weren't there, even though we thought they were there. Fantastic what we're doing across the Shire. One question to the Director, and it's partly off an earlier report and partly off this report, with regard to Victoria Road and Victoria Street. In this report it just says Victoria Road, but in another report it says Victoria Street. The reclassification with Cabon to make it I think it's a regional road, or as in what it is. What would that mean if we were to get that reclassification for council, and not just Blayney, but also Cabon Council, in reclassifying that road?
Mr Director.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the obviously our submission's gone through to the independent panel. My understanding in talking to a member of that panel last week, Transport for New South Wales are considering those projects, those submissions. It has the potential, as you may recall, at the beginning of this financial year, we actually stepped away from the routine maintenance contract with Transport for New South Wales for the state network, for a component of the state network, based on the financial feasibility of it for us. The inclusion or the conversion of that to a regional road would provide us, we suspect, with additional funding through the, subject to everything else remaining the same, through the block grant program and the potential for repair funding, which are both Transport for New South Wales funded programs.
One other just comment, I was speaking to, I think his name was Tim Hansen from the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator, and he was actually commending Grant Baker for conversations and discussions from Blayney Council. So,
Good to know.
yeah, Blayney Council and Grant are being noted at a higher level.
Good to know. Like positive feedback is great. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments regards to the Director's monthly report?
Mr Mayor, just a brief question to our Director in regard to the Spring Terrace Road heavy patching. Is that to be our complete section from Forest East Road to our boundary with Cabon, or is it going to be just part there, section of, or?
Mr Mayor, I'd have to take that on notice and get back to you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Director's report? If not, I'll put the motion in favour. Declared carried. Item 22, page 104. Local roads and community infrastructure phase 2 recommendations there 1 and 2. Councillors, have a mover for these recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Do I have a seconder? We have a seconder for these 2 recommendations. Councillor Newstead, I second that. Councillor, questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A great opportunity on top of the Belubula Way culvert, which we had the opportunity to have a look at previously, and councils have already approved part of this funding to go to that culvert, which is badly, and we've put some supports in to cover that. But the rest of the funding enables us to do some footpath work, and particularly Stilling Fleet Street, to connect the Lee Hostel, because council's also doing some other work in Stilling Fleet Street and Queen Street this next financial year, with Adelaide Street, the main CBD. So that's a major project that will enable the residents of Lee Hostel to access the footpath network and move around more actively in our community. Great also with the culverts to, I think there's potentially 3 culverts that we're going to do some work on, and also some footpath renewal. Again, our footpaths, like everyone here, get older and do need renewal. So to be able to put a little bit of extra money to renew some of those footpaths a little bit quicker is also a major pathway forward. So as well as roads, we're doing some other work in the community, and hopefully the Australian government, the federal government, will approve the funding for these extra projects. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Page 106, item 23, King George Oval, kicking goals for girls, early contractor involvement. Recommendation there. Councillors, have a mover. Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way, and Councillor Somervale, I believe, seconded. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this report? Councillor Kingham.
A couple of things here. We don't really have any information on how they were selected, just the final score. It's quite obvious why those 2 were selected. Don't really know why they scored so highly. And I don't know anything about Renaissance Regional. They a Bathurst firm or whatever, and I'd like to know what's the next steps. I'd like some sort of a program as to, what's the next step, like the next, when are we going to find out what their designs are? And I'd just like a program of development on this project. It's a major project, $750,000, and we need to make sure that it's suitable and satisfactory for the girls. So it was a great idea of the director to get the $750,000 kicking goals for girls, but I'd just like to keep on top of this one, and I'd like to know and where they are based.
So a couple of questions there, one about Renaissance Regional and secondly about providing a bit of a timeline at some future time. Director, have you any information in regards to the question that Councillor Kingham has asked?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Renaissance Regional are from Orange. They have been an organisation that has worked with us in the past, or endeavoured to, on other projects throughout the Shire, including projects. With regards to the criteria, the second page of the report refers to the non-price criteria that were looked at. This phase, or the phase that we're trying to finish up now, is where we sought some additional information from those that we had previously information from, and that has allowed to preferred contractors.
So we will look for a timeline at the first opportunity.
What I'm really asking is, what's the next step? We've approved these tonight. When are we going to say something about a design?
For you, Mr. Mayor, we'll start that process, is what we will get into very shortly. And I'm happy to seek a further report for you, or some information for you on the detail of that program.
That'll be, thank you. This is Thursday Sports Council meeting. The intent?
I will endeavour to do that for you.
Thank you, Councillor Kingham. Councillor Reynolds, you have a question in regards to this item?
And to the director, I just want clarification. I thought it was $1 million project and we got $750,000 in federal government funding. Is that correct, $1 million, or is it $750,000 and I've got the numbers wrong?
0.1.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's actually 1,055,000 or somewhere around that number. The balance from the 750, the balance comes from council.
Okay, thank you, councillors. Quite exciting to see something at King George Oval. Councillor Somerville.
Just very quickly, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I agree with Councillor Kingham. It's obvious who the two top-rated applicants were. I don't think I've ever seen anyone scoring 100 out of 100 on one of these assessments of non-price. They must be very good. At least they're able to demonstrate that. But I assume from this that given that one of the non-price criteria was experience in collaborative design, both organisations have been through a similar sort of ECI collaboration process where they each go out, put some money on the table themselves and develop designs in collaboration with council?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Yes, that was one of the key things we were looking for, and in the conversations that we had with them, to understand what their understanding of the process that we were proposing was.
Fantastic. And finally, on the right at the end of the risk and policy section here, there's a comment that we have our probity plan and our engagement plan. We've, assume, developed those based on our experience with the Browns Creek Road Bridge, where we entered the same sort of project, and I think we had a consultant helping us through that process there.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. We have utilised the basis of what we learnt from the Browns Creek Bridge project and utilised the same probity advisor.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Thank you, Mr. Director. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
No.
Against? Declared carried. Page 109, item 24, Traffic Committee report and minutes, 5th of February recommendations there, 1, 2 and 3. Councillor Reynolds, like to move that way? Yes. And do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Denton has seconded. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got the champagne corks popping.
Excellent.
For Neville. We finally, after a couple of years, managed to get the speed signs moved. I think it's about 150 metres. The director may be able to correct me, towards Blayney. The community asked for it, and it was a long process, and we've now got those signs changed. So a win for the community, and that came from, again, community consultation back a couple of years ago, actually just after I came on council. I think we did some consultation there. So it was a long process, and working with Transport for New South Wales and its precursor organisation, RMS, I think it was. So that's a big win, and so that's a positive outcome that was community driven. Some other issues that were brought up. Carcore Music Festival, I don't know if we've formally launched it yet, but the recommendation here is to support closing off, I think it's Isley Street and maybe Ballabula Street, to conduct this event in March. That's we've got some funding for. A&L, Councillor Ewan brought it to my attention with regard to slow-moving vehicles coming in and out of A&L on Browns Creek Road. Truck drivers very concerned, even coming into the site, and I followed one the other day that was going very, very slowly down the hill, doing everything correctly, but a lot of people tailgate, and they were very worried about rear-end collisions, but also coming out of the A&L site on the new bridge, which we just mentioned a moment ago with Councillor Somervale. Concerns again of people flying around there 100 kilometres an hour. There is a stop sign, and it takes a fair bit for a truck to come out once you've stopped to move forward and get out onto the road. So the Traffic Committee has recommended that we put some warning signs to try and alert motorists about those issues, both coming down the hill, but also coming around the new bridge and meeting trucks slowly coming out of that site. So I think they're the major recommendations. There's also Millthorpe parking and a study. The director may be able to indicate whether the contract has been signed for that study as yet to look at parking and other issues in Millthorpe. So I'll just throw to the director, if I may, Mr. Mayor, to give an update.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Reynolds is correct with regards to the Millthorpe project, and we're doing one in Blayney as well. We have engaged a contractor or consultant for that work. They will be with us tomorrow and Wednesday, and we have some meetings arranged with community members on Wednesday afternoon.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions? As Traffic Committee minutes? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour? Aye. Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to page 113, item 25, Blayney Settlement Strategy 2020. Recommendations there 1 to 6. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Newstead, fantastic. I'd like to move that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reynolds, I'd like to second that. Before I ask for questions and comments, I might just, one of the initiatives is the 500 metre zone from RU5 areas around our villages that may attract building entitlement. I just wonder if the director might just clarify that there'll be some mapping done around that. There's not an automatic building entitlement if you fall in that space. There has a bit of work to be done around that if this is adopted. Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Council's page 116 and 17. There's a dot point that goes over both those pages, and it outlines. It's actually page 116. There's a heading: rural lands within the 500 metres. So there is a second dot point there which lists a number of criteria. That is not the be-all and end-all of the criteria. It's a general guide. Was not specifically input into the strategy to allow flexibility. We are now putting a lot of emphasis on that mapping and how important that mapping will be, not only to identify appropriate lots or holdings that could use this provision, but to also exclude lots that would be inappropriate, particularly with land use conflict and other environmental constraints. We are putting a lot of emphasis into that mapping, and that will be quite a detailed process, which will be required to be done by staff as part of the planning proposal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Director. Very important point. One of the many strategies that came out of this process. I'd just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank the staff for the amount of work. This has been a nearly 2-year process. My fellow councillors for the time and effort that they've put in, and also to the general public for the amount of work, the submissions that received, the meetings that people attended. This is a very, very important strategy. It sets up land use right across our shire for hopefully many years to come, be it the fact that we do have to continue to review it, continuing what we're seeing large growth right across the shire. So land management, really critical, and this document will go a long way, we hope and expect, to support that growth. Questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Reynolds.
Happy to let Councillor Somerville go first if you would like.
Generous of you, Councillor Reynolds. I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Somerville, who has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Reynolds. I hope I'm not going to raise a point that Councillor Reynolds was otherwise going to raise. I probably am. The 500-metre zone around the unsewered villages, I'm very supportive of that, and I'm very supportive of dealing, before we adopt the strategy in relation to that, by identifying the particular blocks of land we're talking about. I think that's going to be important, and I understand what the Mayor just said about the amount of time it's going to take to actually go through and identify those blocks. What I think we need to do, though, as part of that process, is set out the basis on which, I mean, we've got the general additional criteria here, but set out some sort of framework by which we're going to go through that exercise, because I can see we'll have landowners who, on one application of the criteria, may fall within the concession, or they may fall just out of the concession, and it'll be an issue of a discretion size at some stage. And what makes it a lot easier to be able to decide whether a block is included or not included is to have the criteria reasonably well set out and have some for resolution of issues that arise. Because unless we set out the framework within which we're going to decide this, then it could be a sort of fairly long, drawn-out and acrimonious process.
Absolutely, Councillor Somerville. I couldn't agree with you more, because it is can be quite problematic identifying the land. By putting this to the strategy does not automatically guarantee a building entitlement on these blocks. So it's critical that there is a criteria that each block can be assessed on its own merits. Mr. Director, would you like to comment?
Mr. Mayor, if I can just take a comment to that. It's a very good point, Councillor Kingham. We are a shire of villages. Oh, sorry, apologies, Councillor Somerville.
I'm flattered.
And now I've lost my train of thought.
Very good point that Councillor Somerville has made in regards to criteria.
Sorry,
Mr. Director. I put you off your stride.
And with a shire of seven different villages, all with different parameters, particularly that will apply to this provision. I think it's our intent actually to roll probably the Millthorpe 500-metre provision first, and we don't think there's that many there, and actually test that out in a smaller area where there's probably less than half a dozen. So we will roll out as part of strategy action A3, along with some other minor changes in and around Millthorpe, and test that provision.
Strategy, excellent. And I guess on that note too, acknowledge that there is a lot more work to do at Millthorpe itself, around the peri-urban area of Millthorpe, that we'll be master planning that as a separate issue that we're not really taking on board tonight, which is very important because things are moving very quickly around Millthorpe, and we need to make sure we can get it as close as possible to supporting what the community out there would like. Any other questions or comments? Again, it's an important document we've highlighted, which was the public forum tonight. We've identified future growth areas, which all later on will have to have their own planning proposal. But a lot of those issues that people raise will be addressed during those planning proposal process. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I was along similar lines to Councillor Somervale. I do have concerns about the 2 hectare blocks, but we've got to make sure we do them right, and it's good that we're going to do a test case with Millthorpe for a start. One of the submissions with regard to Neville, for example, highlighted the potential to them within agricultural land, and I will use the example of Kingham's Lane, for example, where there are 3 houses, 3 5-acre lots down the end of Kingham's Lane, surrounding 2 farms, one on an L, one as in the other farm that sold them, and it can have an impact on agriculture and the ability to farm. So that's just one example, and there are probably other isolated examples around to make sure that we don't impact badly on agriculture, that someone puts 2 or 3 houses surrounding, within 500 metres of that in all directions is agricultural land, because dogs and other problems, noise, etc., and the right to farm could be an issue. So hopefully we look at that, and that was highlighted in that submission from one of the residents of Neville. But I do like that we have that opportunity, because there is some isolated stranded assets there that are not viable as farms, that are owned by different people to the farmers, and to actually enhance or develop the villages without creating what a lot of people call a North Orange effect of having so many houses right on top of each other, but to actually have them put out so that you still have the village atmosphere on the edge of the villages rather than intense residential development. So I do support that recommendation. With regard to Carcore, I've had a lot of feedback both ways, supportive of the 2,000 square metres subject to a process. Also, some people are worried that it's going to change the character of the village. I think coming up with the 2,000 square metres, which is a contraction from the 3,000 that we currently have, to 2,000 is a good compromise. I think it comes up. Not everyone's going to be happy. No matter what we do, not everyone's going to be happy with what's put out. But I think with Carcore, it's not going to lead to overdevelopment. And as long as the DCP is followed, particularly in the heritage area and character of the village with any developments, I think that, again, it's a positive. But again, as I stipulated, it does need to have geotech, particularly in some of those wetter areas, to make sure that the septic system can actually manage that's being proposed. With regard to Clover Ridge, I have talked with the proponents of that change in zoning. At the time when they came to the community consultation, I had a conversation with them. They had varying ideas about their block. In looking at it closely, it's surrounded by rural residential, and there's a road on the other side before the farmland. So there's actually a barrier there to distinguish it from farmland. So it is already rural residential. So I see that if we've got to divide agricultural land for more 5-acre lots, that's probably a better alternative than subdividing another large farm. And I'd rather see that we enclose or use some of the larger blocks, and I think that one is 12 hectares, if my memory serves me right, or thereabouts, to enable up to 6 lots on that particular block, rather than subdividing another farm in our shire. Though that both may happen. Though I do stipulate that comes off Spring Hill Road, and I will continue with my endeavours to get Spring Hill Road upgraded and sealed. So I'm just flagging that if we're going to approve developments like this, people need to be able to get back into places like Orange, where we heard today or last Friday of a major new development with the rail management of the railway system. So looks as though there's going to be a lot more jobs. We'd love those people to live in our shire, and a lot of them do want to live closer to Orange. So that's a potential there for more demand for within our shire for residential properties. Think and Mandurama, again, the issues around Banana Street are huge, and so the recommendation not to go to the 2,000, but I think it's 4,000 if my memory serves me right on in that particular area, because of flooding issues and other issues in that area. So that's again enabling, as in the 2,000 square metres again, as opposed to the 3,000 that was originally proposed. Had a lot of feedback again in Mandurama about smaller blocks that we want the right to build. The one bit of advice to those people before we change the LEP to actually look at putting in a DA and seeing if they're permissible to build on a smaller block than 2,000 square metres. And the director may be able to indicate, is it going to be roughly 9 to 12 months before the LEP is changed? Is that sort of the potential timeframe?
Through Mr. Mayor, so the alteration to the RU5 village zone goes hand in hand with the 500 metre provision. That's one of the choices that we put to the community and the offsets for that. Given the detail of mapping that's going to have to take, yes, I would anticipate that is probably the time.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
The next issue is Browns Creek. Hopefully we've come up with a good compromise, and again, gaining feedback from A&L in particular. Concerns, they do bring biosolids into the site. Some of them aren't very nice smelling. If we want to try and develop too close to AML, which is a big employer in the Shire, so I think we've come up with a reasonably good compromise there. It does concern me that potentially agricultural land, even though it is already subdivided and maybe subdivided further, but hopefully not too much more prime agricultural land is included, that it's within the developments already on site. And I think that's what the proposal has. Already talked about the 500 metre rule, and Millthorpe, again, for future development, I commend that we're actually going to go and do another study. A lot of feedback from the community, particularly I think it was Morley Street, very concerned about their street being potentially extended. So it makes sense to actually go back and do a further analysis of future demand. But it's interesting, some of the proponents or some of the landholders have gone as far as doing design work already on their blocks. So, there are some people that are very keen to develop, others that are hopefully, that are hoping that no further development. So again, when we do that study, it's going to be a fine line of trying to meet as many people as possible's expectations for Millthorpe to not create a North Orange, but at the same time allow sensible growth, I suppose you could say, within that community. I do want to highlight one thing though, and there was one submission, that what's already approved within the current LEP, again, won't change. So there is a large area that is approved within Millthorpe, and so development could take place on that. And we really have got no real say in whether that takes place or not. So if it does take place, don't blame the current council for that particular development, but we'll wait and see if anything does take place or not on that development. But again, I see that someone, a proponent for that development, did put in a submission on that one. So overall, very positive outcome, a lot of hard work. I'd just like to congratulate Daniel Drum, Mark Dicker, and also Claire Johnson for all the work that they've done, and particularly the consultation, as in I've put a lot of time into it, and I know a couple of the other councillors, like Councillor Somervale in particular, have put a huge amount of time as well into it to try and get a good document out there and good outcomes for the community. I think we're pretty close. We're not going to satisfy everyone, but I think we're going to satisfy probably 98% of the community with this settlement strategy. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the staff.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds, and certainly I've received plenty of feedback lately, and certainly it's been all positive because, as you've mentioned, we went originally the proposal of 4,000 square metres. We've come back from that. We've listened to the community. It was almost half the submissions were around that particular item. So we have listened and we have taken that on board. So it is important, as you've said, Millthorpe is an interesting case. You want to get it right. So it's very appropriate that we do some master planning. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this very important document? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Against? Declared carried. We'll call for a division. I believe that decision was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, councillors. Now to our late item. If I can refer you to the late item in the business papers, councillors, late report. which is item 26, page 2. Everyone right? Yep. Okay. Item 26, page 2, Tourism Event Development Fund. Recommendation there, Council approves the following 2 events. Financial support. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, I think, got in first. A second that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to this item? Very appropriate, these 2 events to be supported. Excellent. I know Councillor Reynolds. Yes.
I was just going to say the chocolate on purpose, as in I learned about a new business today. I didn't realise that it existed. So
Yeah, no, excellent.
in Millthorpe, and it's good that we can support this business with rebranding, marketing in our shire, small business. I think there's 2 people involved with it, so fantastic.
Absolutely. I'm personally very excited about the Millthorpe Garden Ramble virtual autumn. I think that's that's a great initiative on top of the success of last year's Garden Ramble, virtual Garden Ramble. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Declared carried. Councillors, that brings us to the end of our business here this evening. I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance. I'd like to thank the members of the gallery here tonight and those people that have chosen to watch us online. I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.